Tell me where it works. I'm not over here.
Our conversation will start in about 15 minutes, so if people want to get coffee, water, all that, please feel free, and then we'll get started.
Where would you like us?
Why don't you sit here?
Okay.
We'll put Petra in the middle,
Okay.
and then
Very
Timothy
good.
at the end.
All right.
I thought they were food.
Yeah, there she is. This, I'll put this somewhere on the side of the stage so I don't sit on it.
In the middle? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. If I could have everyone's attention, we're going to get started. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Mehta. I am the CEO and Chief Content Officer of a company called Mansueto Ventures. We publish Inc. magazine and Fast Company magazine. And Fast Company is a proud media partner of Social Innovation House. So welcome to this very exciting panel here at the Social Innovation House. Welcome to everybody here in the room, and welcome to those of you who are joining us via the live stream. Before I go ahead and introduce our panelists and kick off this great conversation, I'd love to just get a sense of who all is in the room. If you consider yourself a social entrepreneur or a social innovator, could you raise your hand? Great. And who here is from a corporate, large enterprise? Terrific. Anyone from government or NGOs? small population from government NGOs. Well, we're going to have a great conversation, and we're going to be hearing a little bit from the corporate perspective on the evolving role of the CEO. But then we're going to open it up to some questions from all of you, and hopefully we can make this a real dialogue and a real engaged discussion. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce my panelists. To my immediate left is Jim O'Leary. He is the CEO of Weber Shandwick. Next to Jim is Petra Jenner, CEO of Splunk in EMEA. And finally, we have Timothy Young, who is the CEO of Jasper. So help me in welcoming our panelists. So I'd like to kick things off with Jim. Weber Shandwick recently completed a really interesting piece of research that provides some insight into what the CEO is thinking. And so as we talk about the evolving role of the CEO, I'd love it if you could share some high-level findings from your study.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephanie. So we're releasing this research next week, so I guess this is a bit of a preview. We connected with 200 CEOs and members of C-suites at Fortune 500 companies around the world, right? Combination of U.S. and international headquartered companies. And I think what we found kind of falls into 3 chapters, right? The first chapter is going to be the least surprising to all of you. There is a significantly increased sense of renewed economic optimism heading into 2025 than in years past, particularly in the United States. But overall, we found that more than 50% of the CEOs that we spoke to have this renewed sense of economic optimism. That's chapter number 1. Chapter number 2 is that despite this renewed sense of economic optimism, there is significant concern around all the volatility in the world, right? I think 2/3 of the CEOs that we spoke to indicate that that they're increasingly concerned about volatility, and it's less about the more traditional concerns with volatility, things like product recalls or cyber attacks, which, by the way, there of course is still concern about, but it's much more about the volatility that's external or outside of outside of our control, things like global conflicts or climate situations, mis or disinformation, terrorist attack, that kind of stuff. That's chapter 2. Chapter number 3, and this is something that's a bit concerning to those of us in the profession of communications and government relations and public affairs, which is that when we spoke to the CEOs, many of them, in fact, majority of them, they don't necessarily feel like their teams are equipped to navigate the complexity that we're describing in this world, right? So less than 2 out of 10 of the CEOs that we spoke to feel like their teams are well equipped to navigate this kind of increased degree of volatility and complexity, especially as it relates to their communications, their public affairs and their government relations team. And this actually is very similar to some research that many of you may have seen recently that came out of McKinsey, which indicates that I think 60% of CEOs place more value in external affairs than ever before, but less than 2 out of 10 of those same exact CEOs feel like their teams are delivering on that. So, that's kind of the research in 3 parts. And some of us were talking about this a little bit earlier, today, and I'm very excited to hear what you two have to say about, kind of what you're seeing in your own organizations as it relates to all of this.
Yeah, I think I wanted to do a deep dive on all 3 of the chapters, but Petra, is what you're hearing from Jim consistent with what you're experiencing in your role?
Yes, I would say it is consistent. There's an increased volatility in business in general, caused by external factors, also caused by technology. And I would say it depends in terms of the optimism. I would say in Europe, I would say it's a little bit more cautiously optimistic, if I may say, because if you see the projections of GDP growth, they vary country by country, and some of the largest economies in Europe are unfortunately not growing. So I think there is some concern in Europe about 2025. But if you take then the Middle East, you see huge growth. There's almost incredible growth, incredible projects, fantastic innovation happening there. So it really depends. I would say the world is now in different categories, depending on where you live and what regions you are covering. So I think and that also to navigate as a CEO is extremely difficult and challenging these times. And you need to adapt constantly to change, and you need to ensure that you build this culture of adaptability in your organization at the same time while being fast enough to respond to the ever-challenging environment and changing environment. I think that's the way I would summarize. I think, and companies are more than ever very much focusing on how can I become a very resilient organization. And resilient in a sense of digital resilient, because there is also an increased cyber security landscape and threat landscape, which is also attacking companies of all sizes and all parts of the business. And all of this comes together. So, but on the other hand, there is huge opportunity coming, with the age of AI, to be clear. And I think there's huge innovation coming as well, which could be used also to hopefully navigate some of these challenges better in the future.
Timothy, Jasper is an AI company. You sit at that intersection of optimism and volatility. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your company and whether that mirrors some of the findings that Jim started us off with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, both for me personally and then working, probably today about 25% of the Fortune 500 CEOs and CMOs is very, very consistent. I think as a leader today, you really don't have a choice but to be optimistic, right? You have all your stakeholders, you have all your employees. They're looking to you as a leader to help navigate a very uncertain period of time, right? And so I think as a leader, though, you have to balance that optimism with a sober understanding that many of the systems that we've relied on for the last couple decades may not be as strong as we thought, right? They may be a lot more fragile. And so when I think about, leadership and how to steer my company or how to help advise other companies, it's really a thought to how do I manage that uncertainty, right? I think companies have begun to be pretty adept at managing volatility, but it is uncertainty, right? It is uncertainty about the rate of change that's coming, the rate of technology change, and then also I think as we saw this week, the rate of geopolitical change, right? So as a leader, I'm worried about cybersecurity. I'm worried about is my supply chain going to be the same next year as it is this year? And then I'm also worried internally about how do I organize my entire staff to be aligned to respond quickly and effectively. And I think leaders are looking to solutions like AI, right? As we see intelligence essentially become commoditized, how do you think about a world in which you need to move your employees in creating value kind of up the stack, right? How do you transform them from being builders in your company to really being architects, right? How do you leverage kind of an infinite amount of intelligence and an infinite amount of building content? And I think so it's demanding a lot different capabilities and skills for leaders.
Jim, I want to talk a little bit about another finding from your study, which is that 99% of respondents think that the interests of multiple stakeholders are important. And yet, when you dig in a little bit, it definitely feels like customers and shareholders are at the top of that pyramid. So how do we square this notion of continuing to be stakeholder driven, but not all stakeholders are created equal?
Right. So the proverbial debate between the stakeholder capitalism and shareholder view of the world or something. Well, look, first, I actually think that that's kind of a false choice, right? That we, those in the consulting class, the chattering class, like to get maybe caught up in the role of the corporation and business and society and all the rest. But I think that that's a little bit of a false choice. I think that Tim hit the main point, which is like a lot of this is about value creation, and so I don't see why you can't create value for all of your stakeholders at the same time. And sure, in certain moments, creating value for an investor or an employee or even a political stakeholder might look a little bit different, and there might be some tension in between that. But I don't think it's like a victory of shareholder primacy over stakeholder capitalism or something, which is one of the things that you hear a little bit about in today's environment, because it's certainly true that the pendulum has swung a bit, back from where it had been a couple of years ago. We were just talking about this earlier, and in some ways it's difficult to say this 'cause it's sitting in the Social Innovation House, but even the term ESG at Davos and how frequently it's used this year versus as recent as last year is much different, right?
Right. But it sounds like, I mean, even going back to last year before that, the conversation around social innovation has always been, it has to be a good business decision. It can't just be, it's not philanthropy. It is innovation. It is business. Petra, at Splunk, you do a lot to support social innovators through the business itself. Can you just talk a little bit about your initiatives there?
Yeah, so first of all, I believe it's social innovation will continue to be very important. And as you rightly said, it's part of the business, right? Because we need to, first of all, make sure that we ensure everyone has access to technology. That's absolutely crucial. And, because if that's not the case, we have already a digital divide, which is probably the worst thing we can go after. So that's one thing. So accessibility to technology. The other thing is also education, training. Ensure that the people can get regular training on new technology, emerging technologies, wherever they're located and whatever their ambitions are. I think these are things we have been very outspoken about it, and there are programs underlying it to ensure that, a huge workforce is going to be trained, future workforces, to also ensure that the workforces are not getting divided, whether it's, from an age perspective, from a knowledge perspective, location, or educational background perspective. So that's what we're doing. And, we have, Splunk belongs now to Cisco, and we have been able to, participate in some of the Cisco programs. And there's a huge training initiative going on, especially in the area of AI, because we believe that we need to generate a new understanding and new digital skills, AI-related skills, for example, like data literacy, in order to be able to really understand and leverage data better to make informed decisions and also being at the forefront. So I think these are things which will continue to stay, regardless sentiment which may be in the market right now. I would say it's very important as an organization to be responsible about the society. And this is also part of the business, right? While being focused on the customer and customer engagements.
Timothy, can you talk a little bit about the ways that the larger AI community here at WEF is thinking about ethical deployment of AI, and then maybe specifically what you're doing at Jasper?
Yeah, and I would just say, maybe the lack of ESG discussion is not such a bad thing. Maybe it's actually a sign of progress. I would say that I think from myself and executives that I work with, I think the notion that you can maximize shareholder value without paying attention to societal value and impact is really an outdated notion. And I think to be a successful company moving forward, to have longevity, those two things need to be intrinsically interlocked and linked. And I think, when it comes to AI, I think there's a couple very important things. I think, first of all, everyone that is building the technology, working on the technology, has a personal responsibility around the ethics of it and around the equal access of it. And equally, I think from a government perspective, I think there's a responsibility to make sure that people are held accountable for those results and that there is equal access given. So I think that's incredibly important. I think from a Jasper point of view, we take that very seriously. And I think that starts with transparency. It starts transparency internally as a leader about how we think about the deployment of AI, how we think about its impact, and then how we engage with our customers who are leveraging our technology, and being extremely transparent, like showing how models arrive at certain outputs, right? We talk a lot to our employees internally about asking our employees to show their work, right? Don't just come up with the answer. Show me how you got there. Show me the thinking, because that builds more resiliency and is good modeling for the organization. And I think that's something that we try to build in all of our tools, right? When we're helping marketing teams expand their reach, expand their coverage, develop better campaigns, drive better ROI, we need to help the people who are using those tools understand how it got there. And I think transparency is the first step, and the transparency really needs to be radical.
Yeah. I want to push back a little, though, because what makes us believe that things will be different this time around when it comes to AI, when government has not really been able to hold executives accountable for, say, challenges that we've seen in the social media space, and when we still have digital divide issues? Petra actually pointed those out. How do we know that access will be better for AI? How do we know that governments will hold actors accountable this time around?
I think from a technology side, I can't speak as much from a government side, but I think a technology side, it's ensuring that we have a very healthy and vibrant open source community, right? Ensuring that when we are actually open sourcing a model, we're also open sourcing the weight, so you can understand, right? What is the lineage? What data went into that model? How does that model function? How does it operate? And again, I think it does start with transparency. I think that there is a lot of work going on across the industry when it comes to openly talking about the impacts. And I think we also need corporates who are leveraging this technology to begin to talk about their impact and use, because they are actually seeing the downstream effects.
We're going to open it up for questions in just a few minutes. Jim, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how companies can deal with the volatility that you've identified in your research, and especially at a time when they've identified that perhaps they are not as confident in their ability to communicate, and their government affairs teams and their corporate affairs teams' ability to sort of communicate around these challenges. Do the old playbooks work when we're dealing with new kinds of volatility, or do we need a whole new kind of playbook?
Well, I think we certainly need a new playbook. I'm sure there's aspects of the old playbook that are still relevant, but back to kind of like your macro question. I mean, it's interesting because you use the phrase resiliency, and I think that's a key part of it. I think also like I don't know, Tim, if you use this term, but you were certainly talking about this, but like agility, right? So like in a world where there is there's so much volatility, increased volatility, concern around volatility, especially volatility outside of one's control, there's like two very contradictory things that I think every corporation is doing or should be doing, right? And one is like you got to plan for it. So in a way that previously you might not have, you're planning for some type of armed conflict, or you're planning for some type of maybe terrorist attack or climate incident or whatever it is, right? Mis or disinformation. At the same time, you have to, in the same way that the military does, I guess, what is the military saying? Like, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. I think from like a business scenario planning perspective, you have to be agile and understand that whatever scenario planning you've done, it's unlikely to survive contact with the volatility, and so you have to have the agility to be able to flex and read and react and work around it in real time. I also think, since we're here in Davos, and no conversation would be complete without tying everything back to AI. I'll tie it back to AI, and I do think that there are certainly things that AI allows companies to do specific to this, either scenario planning or flexing with the reality of what's happening on the ground, that previously was impossible. That I think all companies need to be doing. Tim can tell you more precisely what those things are, and so I'm going to set him up to do that right now.
I mean, I think this is a really bold moment in time for leaders and companies, and I think it's an opportunity to really step up and rethink your organization. I think there are very few moments, I think, in a leader's career where you have the winds of change that are so strong, both from a human capital side and then also from a technology side, and they're converging very quickly. AI is a very different type of technology. It needs to be personally adapted to each employee and each organization. And that's very unlike software of the last 20 years, whether it was social software, mobile software, cloud, where you just deployed it like all of your competitors, right? And differentiated value in the future is your ability to reorganize and rethink your organization from first principles around this new AI infrastructure. And that's really the key. And it's a bold, opportunity for leaders to really sit down and say, okay, if we have this ability to have infinite intelligence, right, what would we do differently? How do we think about new roles, new teams, new geographies? Because your reach can actually expand quite a bit. And then I think you have to think about what is the relationship between your employees and now this machine intelligence, right? And what you find, and what we find in a lot of our customers, is that a lot of the work that employees were doing was pretty machine-like. In marketing, some roles are 50 to 80% very rote, very mechanical, right? And so my hope, I think, for leaders is how do we sort of de-industrialize the employee experience? How do we make machines do all of that heavy lifting? And how do we help our employees become almost more human-like? Because that's where the new value will be created, and it can be expanded out to customers, out to partners, and hopefully to do a lot better for the world, no matter where you are.
Yeah, Petra, I was going to ask you because you're now part of Cisco, and a previous CEO of that company always talked about how Cisco would eat its own dog food, that whatever was out in the marketplace, Cisco would test internally first. And I'm wondering at Splunk, can you talk about the ways that you are deploying AI internally? If there's some examples you can share that might help those of us who are about to undertake what Tim has just described, get our arms around the possibilities of this technology?
Yes, I mean, I have to admit, I liked what you just said because I was smiling. You said, it will make us more human again. It's my strong belief that AI is not an enemy. AI will make us more human again. Because I think it's, if you just look from the way we work at Splunk and also how we consult with our customers, how they should work, it is really they're twofold. One is the productivity gains, which is more the area of generative AI, where you can, do tasks you have to do repeatedly to just reduce it and probably give it back to the AI tool you're using. Then on the other hand, you have this very sophisticated machine learning side where you are more into how do you predict maintenance, things like that. And that's also how we use part of our own technology. And sometimes we use it just to send some Christmas greetings, using our own platform and just test and probe whether we can do it. Then sometimes we use it also to predict what is the business going to look like, And then also we use it to check and predict whether there is a new attack going to happen and whether there is a way we can give this knowledge and insight to our customers, right, as part of a service. So there are multiple ways of adopting it, but I think the two big pillars we see right now on adopting AI in general is more to gain more productive, whether it's in the business side, whether it's forecasting, of potential business, because it's data-led. And then the other part is where we potentially can predict, are machines going down? Is that going to have an impact on the supply chain, or is that going to have an impact on, that we need a repair service to be ordered in advance, right? So I'm just trying to be specific with the examples, but these are things which are already there, and they will be fine-tuned even further, and they will conquer more and more areas of our overall companies and businesses. And I think that's good. That's good news for all of us. And our future work, I'm very confident, will be much more about thinking, asking the right questions, and understand what could we really do with the time we gain, like being more innovative, trying to find ways to solve big planetary questions rather than the small, little, gritty, repetitive tasks you just referred to. I think everyone is tired of that. So everyone wants to have an exciting role. So I'm very, very optimistic about it.
Can I build on something related to the research real quick before we go to Q&A that is certainly not as interesting as the idea of AI making humans more human. But I do feel like I should probably clarify it. So because it relates to the second part of the question you asked me. When we did this research, and the third part of the story, right, as I mentioned, so part number one being just renewed economic optimism, particularly in the U.S., part number two being increased volatility, and then part number three being, concern around a team's ability to navigate this complexity. When we looked at it and when we heard from all of these CEOs about the outlook for 2025, and they did express this concern around their team's ability to navigate the complexity, I don't think that we should read into the results of that research that, you used a couple phrases, Stephanie, like maybe around like their communications team and that kind of thing. I think that it's when they express their concern around their team's ability to navigate the complexity, I don't know if it was about like their team's ability to do communications better or worse, or like the people in the roles, as much as like with this increased volatility and the expectations around external affairs being as high as they are now in order to navigate this complexity, then the finding was probably more precisely related to the team's ability to deliver on that, but maybe not so much at like the individual level or like the act of the communications or the government relations, and more just like the fact that with all this increased complexity at the intersection of business, society, culture, politics, et cetera, and with that the increased expectations, that now it's more like, can my team, not as individuals, but like as a team or as a function, help me navigate this? And that's where the lack of, I think, like high confidence comes into play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and thank you for clarifying. But so to build on what Tim was saying earlier, if this is a moment to blow things up, my words, not yours, but if we are at this unique moment where technology is changing everything, there's a human capital shift happening, are there new structures that companies need to contemplate to manage that complexity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I wonder if either of you have like started to think about that. Tim, you in particular, as like you're facing this new reality, one that you're not remotely. I mean, you seem very equipped to handle, and you're advising clients on how to handle it. So I don't know, what are you guys doing over there?
I mean, I think we've started to rethink the entire organization really from the ground up, and it starts with, I think, rethinking an individual employee's experience. I think over the last few generations, it's about actually doing the work. And I think, now for a lot of our employees, it's about coordinating the work. It's about architecting. It's about narrating the work, right? And so almost every employee becomes a manager. You have a system of agents, or you have a platform like Jasper that is doing a lot of that heavy lifting, a lot of that heavy work. And so for individuals, it is more about how do you find connections? How do you synthesize? How do you create meaning for customers? How do you create meaning for partners? And so it's really rethinking that employee experience. But it gives our business a lot of leverage. Our business of 250 employees can show up at a Fortune 10 company like we have 5,000 employees, right? The rate at which we can respond to them, the rate at which we can understand their business, deliver results, is in fractions of the time. Where a few years ago it probably would have taken us 3 weeks to do a turnaround, takes literally 30 minutes, and that notion of speed, right? No matter where you do business, speed is one of the most critical things. And so I think for us and our customers, when they see that change so starkly, it gets them to kind of open up their minds of what is possible that has previously been unachievable. And then you start to think, okay, how do we organize our people to be able to really leverage this technology and apply it to the workflows in the business, not just as a productivity tool, but something that can really show up and drive impact on the P&L.
Let's go to some questions from the audience. I think we have a mic runner, or if not, I can go ahead and give you my microphone. We just want to be able to make sure that people who are listening on the live stream can hear you. Just tell us your name.
Thank you. I'm Brian Gallagher. I'm the co-founder of something called the Abundance Circle, which is an impact investment catalytic fund, and I was the CEO of United Way for 19 years. And I resonate with business now embracing multi-stakeholders and societal issues or business issues. Here's what I worry about, and I would love to hear your response to it. The digital revolution And the fourth industrial revolution has created unbelievable amounts of wealth, right? Global economy has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and it's created historically high income inequality. And as the technology speeds again with AI, that divide is going to get wider, in my view. And it may be right that ESG and so forth is something of the past, just like everything else was something of the past. I worry about how CEOs and leadership teams get compensated for either short-term targeted growth, intense growth, versus longer-term, more broad-based growth, inclusive growth. And I'd finish with this last point, and that policy matters on that as well. We just went through this political debate in the U.S. around access to the internet. And is the internet, access to the internet, is that a utility or is it a commercial product? That's a very different, that's how you answer that question is really important in terms of inclusive growth and access to everything you guys are talking about. I just wonder how CEOs are going to be compensated and how shareholders think about this.
Look, I think it's, of course, it's a very important question, and I would say the following. I think I have worked in technology companies all my life, and the way I have been compensated is always having a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term aspect of it, which is actually a little bit against what you were, or it shows that your concerns are probably not as obvious as they should be. But of course, it looks like it's all short-term. But from my experience, many large technology companies have very interesting mechanisms in place to really combine the short, mid, and long term together, and it's an equal compensation. So if you don't meet and contribute to the long-term objectives as a senior executive or a CEO in a company, you will have difficulties to get your bonuses accordingly, right? So I think what we shouldn't underestimate, there is a huge dependency on the long-term evolution of a company in terms of the long-term financial contribution of a company is also very important to employees in the technology space, because they have, sometimes shares which are granted over a very long period of time. So it's not only a quarter, the typical 90 days, it's over years. So I think all of this should hopefully avoid us to increase the potential divide.
Other questions? Yes, hang on one second. Let me hand you my mic.
Thank you very much. Juan Francisco from Japan Tobacco International. If you had one advice to policymakers, what would it be when it comes to adapting faster to what's happening in the world? The OECD and the World Economic Forum, for that matter, they have published papers about agile regulation. So we have fast evolving consumer needs, fast evolving technology, as we all know. What would be this one advice so that the policy process can be adapted to this fast moving environment?
I think I'll speak at least when it comes to engagement on AI. I think what I've seen being in the industry for 25 years is that large companies, large enterprises who specifically spend a fair bit on lobbying spend the most time with regulators, and it's a very much going to regulators rather than regulators and governments coming to the industry. I think it's beginning to shift with AI, but I think all of these technology industries are a lot broader than just some of the big corporate names, that you hear about every day. I think it would benefit regulators and governments to invest time in working with the entire ecosystem and getting a much broader, diverse opinion of what's going on, because it will help them, I think, understand the rate of change. Many times, the most interesting advancements are not first revealed at the large organizations. The industry knows about them much, earlier. If you go back to generative AI, 2017 was when the generative AI paper on transformers came out. The industry and a lot of small companies and investors knew about the technology for many, many years. But it took products like Jasper and then right after ChatGPT to come out for regulators to actually take notice. But at that point, the technology is already released into the wild. And so I think early engagement, systematic engagement, not just periodic or episodic, and trying to be more proactive. And I would just say at first, not trying to be proactive in management, but being proactive with curiosity. And if you can lead with that early, I think solutions and partnership will be much more better informed and more timely. And I think you can be proactive, which will benefit everyone.
Yeah, I agree with Tim. I mean, I think that it's certainly, I'm not sure that all regulators understand that while the pace of change has never been faster, it will probably also never be slower than it is today.
We have time for one more question. Right here, please.
Yeah, kind of building on that and on what you said about speeding up. Is there a risk that actually it's going too fast for humans and your teams to kind of keep up with the pace of change, keep up with the ability, like you said, going from 3 months to 3 days? What is kind of the risk factor there? And sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Amanda Martin from the Global Impact Coalition, working to decarbonize the chemical industry.
Well, I think right now at organizations, small all the way to large enterprises, there's internal and external pressure to deploy technologies like AI, right? There is a fear that you will not be competitive unless you deploy it very quickly. At the same time, there's a lot of fear about what are the implications, both internally for companies to customers, and then to society at deploying it very quickly. So I think as leaders, as CEOs, you need to come to the problem and the challenge of bringing new technology with a large amount of respect for it, but also responsibility. And so when we are advising CEOs, it is a kind of a crawl, walk, run phase. Right now, everybody's just trying to deploy it, allowing employees to bring it in. But I think you want to be more defined and more structured, right? Find an area of opportunity that can really uplift employees. Find those work streams in your business that do drive value so you can show to stakeholders that you're improving the business. But find the ones that are more routine, more machine-like with employees, free them up, and then learn. And then as you learn from how the technology not only works from a technology standpoint, but how it works in terms of its impact. How does it change the psychological dynamics of the organization? How does it change the value creation for all the stakeholders? And then you kind of build up layer by layer. I think there are a number of companies now who are starting to approach it, right? They did a bunch of POCs, they did a bunch of pilot programs, and now they're starting to walk it back and say, all right, let's innovate here with AI, check the impact, and then improve it. But I think it's a big challenge for CEOs because there's a lot of external pressure. If you look at just the news cycle of the last couple of years, we've had major elections in Europe, major elections in the US, multiple wars going on. And on any given week, the top stories are still AI. And so I think that when you're a CEO and you open up the FT, you open up the Journal, you open up the Times, and that is still the lead story, and Zelensky's on page 2, there's an incredible amount of pressure to respond. And I think CEOs are now starting to take a pause, reflect, engage the right companies that can help them, because it is as much about a human transformation as it is about a machine or a technology transformation.
Before I let our panelists go, we started by talking about the things that CEOs are optimistic about. I'd like to end on an optimistic note. Could I ask each of the CEOs on the panel to name one thing they're optimistic about in 2025? And it can be about business, it can be about society, it can be about anything. Jim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, like similar to the research results, I am optimistic about the economic outlook, particularly in the U.S. I think that there's been a good amount of capital on the sidelines that's going to get put to work this year, and I think there's going to be a significant increase in M&A, and I think that overall, I'm bullish about the economic outlook.
Great. Petra?
I'm optimistic because I think there's so much innovation happening that I think the world will become a better place.
Tim?
I think, you know, I love working in technology because I think the biggest thing that we provide is allowing people to be more effective and kind of become superheroes at work. And it's not just about work, it's about if you can do that, then you allow them to be better people outside of work. You allow them to be superheroes outside. And I think for me, that's what I'm most looking forward to with AI.
What about you, Stephanie?
I hope all three of you are right. That's what I'm optimistic about. So,
Well done.
yeah, well played. I want to thank Jim, Petra, and Tim for their exciting comments, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for those of you who are watching online.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.